Hey Internet, I've gone back and forth about posting this for a long time, but this is the story of what happened after I said yes. The morning it began, the kitchen smelled like caramelized sugar and wet stone. Rain had been working the city since dawn, a fine, steady rinse that turned every surface into a darker version of itself, sidewalks into slate, our old red brick building into something mahogany and solemn. The windows wore the kind of fog that makes rooms feel more private than they are. From the street below, a delivery truck groaned, hissed, and gave up. Inside, the kettle sang over a low flame, and I cut peaches into crescents so thin you could see the marbled light through them. Maya patted in wearing my college sweatshirt, sleeves pushed past the elbows, hair gathered in a ruff not the color of old whiskey. She always looked most like herself in that uncombed hour between bed and whatever the day wanted. She touched my lower back as she passed. Two universal notes, the way you greet a person you have chosen for years and expect to choose again. A simple touch, but I still felt the electricity, the silent litany my body never stopped praying. Here she is. We should talk, she said, breezy, like people say we should get basil or we're out of olive oil. She sat on the stool by the island and curled one leg up, bare foot tucked under the other knee. The gesture made a familiar ache jog through my chest, the kind made of old photographs and habits you hope never to lose. Okay, I said, and set the knife down, the blade clinking faintly against the cutting board like a small bell that didn't know it had been rung. She stared past me toward the window where the rain threaded itself, then back. I noticed, as a person does when they're about to receive news, 1,000 details I'd never cataloged. A tiny nick on the bowl's rim, the way the fruit's flesh glowed near the stone, the soft sound of the radiator waking up. Maya's eyes were bright in a careful way, like a porch light left on because someone's coming home late. We've been together since we were 22, she began, and I felt my shoulders tip forward by a fraction, as if those words were a rope around my chest she was pulling gently, to see if I'd move. I love you. I love us. She spread her fingers over the countertop, pressing her palm flat, grounding herself. You know that. You must know that. I do, I said. I did. I would have tattooed it on the underside of my ribs if it meant I could take it out and show it to her. She took a breath that seemed to include, and then refused the whole room. I want to talk about opening us. Not because I'm unhappy. Not because I want to leave. It's more. She grimaced, searching for words like someone groping in a drawer full of mostly blunt knives. It's like there's a corridor inside me I've never walked down, and I keep thinking I'll die without knowing what's there. The kettle went past, singing into the high keen of insistence. I turned to silence it and counted 2 beats so I wouldn't answer with a sound instead of a sentence. When I turned back, she'd pulled her knees to her chest, her sweatshirt riding up to reveal a thin white crescent scar near her hip. The bike accident when we were 25, the day I ran beside her on the trail, carrying her sandal in my fist like proof I could still hold something of hers. You mean polyamory, I said, and the word felt like a coin I'd been handed in a currency I didn't use. Maybe, she said, or just opening 1 or 2 connections. With rules. People do it. And when they do it right, they say they're more honest, more themselves. Her voice thinned at the end, as if it had been stretched over something too wide. I wanted to answer with a joke, to tell her that every person who's ever jumped into a winter lake says they feel more alive, too, but that doesn't mean I should follow them. Instead, I leaned on the counter so my wrists cooled on the stone. Why now? She tilted her head, and I felt like I was looking at a photograph of her slightly out of focus. Because I trust us now. Because it's not about running. I think it's about staying differently. Staying and making room. Her face was open, guileless, not the face of a person laying a trap. Maybe that's why it felt like a trap. She was offering me permission to refuse and asking, at the same time, for my consent to be the kind of person who wouldn't. I thought of us at 22, sleeping on a mattress with the tag still on it, eating cereal with water when we forgot to buy milk, laughing at nothing until the neighbors banged on the wall. I thought of the first apartment we could afford without a roommate, the way she danced with an armful of plates while I painted the hallway. I thought of her father's funeral, the way she slid her hand into mine under the pew as if she needed to know how bones felt under skin to prove the world didn't end at the casket. I thought, fiercely, of our vows at the Arboretum, her voice shaking on for worse, and how we both smiled because we were children in a good way, sure we'd be spared too much of the worse. Say no, she said suddenly, startling me. Her eyes watered and steadied. If this is a no for you, I need to be able to love you inside a no. I swallowed. The air was sweet with fruit and too heavy. Somewhere below us, a neighbor opened and closed a door decisively. The sound made my heart clench. I don't know, I said, and the truth of that felt like a small door opening onto darkness. I don't know who I can be inside that. I'll be patient, she said. Her hand found mine across the counter. Warm, familiar. The topography of someone I could navigate with my eyes closed. We can read. Talk to people. Try nothing before we try anything. If we decide it's not for us, we put the lid back on. I nodded, because I loved her, because I was afraid of the version of us where I refused and became a wall, because another fear, quieter and meaner, whispered that if I said no she would go anyway, but in a way that made me, by my refusal, the villain. I nodded because in that moment love felt like saying yes to any room she wanted to walk into. Even if it meant I stood in the doorway watching her vanish down a corridor I couldn't follow. Okay, I said, and her shoulders loosened as if I had cut a string with scissors. We'll talk. Slowly. She came around the island then and kissed my cheek, the peach sugar scent of her hair close, her eyes wet. Thank you, she said into my skin. Thank you. What I remember most about that day is not the conversation. It's the after. The way she set the table for the peaches as if they were a celebration. The way the rain slackened and a square of light opened on the floor. The way I ran my thumb along the knife's spine to remind myself which side was safe. We became diligent students of a thing we did not yet want to name. We read at night in bed, back to back like two scholars, pausing to underline, to laugh softly at the preposterousness of some advice that treated hearts like machines you could tune with a screwdriver. Words like compersion felt like puzzles carved out of smooth wood, pleasant to hold, unclear in purpose. Still, we tried. We said, I want to be honest with you about X, and I notice I feel Y when you say Z, and it made our mouths feel full of pebbles we had to speak around. If you had asked me then, I would have told you we were happy. The kindness between us had not left. If anything, it had sharpened in the way things do when you fear you might lose them. She stood with me at the sink, drying plates and telling me about a grant proposal at work, the way her boss said meanwhile like it was always an accusation. I went to the hardware store and came back with hooks that finally solved the mess of our coats. We ordered a larger whiteboard for the kitchen. She drew lines for weeks and added color coding. An earnest geometry I chose to find endearing instead of ominous. The first night we stepped into the so-called circle, it felt like entering a room mid-story. We arrived at a loft on Pine Street with high peeled brick walls and a skylight that made the rain a visible presence rather than a sound. A laminated poster about consent had been propped near a table of hummus, olives, and 3 different kinds of crackers that all tasted like scorched air. A woman with silver hair and a perfect cat eye introduced herself as Nadine and said, "Welcome, loves," in a tone that made me want to check my pockets for any unexamined sins. Maya's hand squeezed mine twice. Our code for everything's fine, even when it isn't. I squeezed back, out of love and habit, and because I was a little seasick with the way the room tilted just by existing. People wore name tags and smiles that were either brave or brittle. A teacher explained the house rule about not getting drunk, so consent stayed clear. An engineer with a quiet laugh demonstrated a card game where strategy mattered more than luck. I watched Maya beam and tilt her head and radiate that attentive warmth that had first found me when we were 22, and felt proud of the way she moved in the world, as if I had carved her out of some good wood, smoothed and oiled, and was watching her catch the light. And then, here is the inconvenient truth. I felt afraid of how brightly other people might see her shine. We met Dev and Lila by accident at the snack table, because we were all reaching for the same fig tart at once, apologizing in that performance of manners people do when they want to be seen being considerate. Dev was tall in the genial way of people whose bodies have always cooperated with them. He had a smile like a hammock you could sit back in. His hair curled at the edges, and he wore the kind of worn leather boots that announce a person is practical even when they are not. Lila was small and exact, pecan brown hair tucked behind one ear, a laugh that came in unexpected bell notes. Her eyes looked like they could hold attention the way cupped hands hold water. "Dev," he said, offering a hand that was warm without being damp. "Lila," she added, touching my arm lightly as if proving touch could be harmless. "You're Maya and Eli, right? Nadine said you were new." "I didn't realize we had a press release," Maya joked, and the four of us laughed. We migrated to the rug with a deck of cards and a bowl of olives. The game was the sort that feels trivial until you realize it has quietly been mapping the landscape of its players. What makes them bluff when they fold, who risks early, and who hoards power until the end. Dev was easy. He let you see him change his mind. Lila noticed when someone drew a breath before they reached and adjusted. Maya played like a person eager to be good, quick to apologize when she took a card someone needed. I played like a person trying not to reveal that he was measuring every smile against some internal ruler he'd never used before. Later, walking home under my umbrella, our city alive with wet neon and hurrying strangers, Maya said, "I like them." Water gathered on the umbrella's edge and fell in deliberate beads. They felt, I don't know, adult. "Yeah," I said, "adult." The word tasted foreign. That night in bed, we lay on our backs too close to sleep. The ceiling had our window's watery signature on it. "Tell me what you're feeling," she whispered. "I'm feeling," I said, then stopped, because the list was too long. Protective, proud, jealous, curious, terrified, older than my body, so young I could cry. "I'm feeling like I'm looking at the ocean from the parking lot." She turned toward me, the sheets sighing. "I love you," she said, as if this were a synonym for safety. "We don't do anything we can't walk back from." I wanted to answer, "There are steps you can't ungive." But I kissed her forehead and put my hand on her hip where the scar lived and let the sound of the rain argue for sleep. The first time she went to see them without me, the world narrowed to whatever room I was in. I washed the dishes, then washed them again because I forgot I'd washed them. I took a shower and dried my hair with the vigor of someone erasing a message written in fog. I tried to read, but the words scrabbled away. I opened every window and then closed them all as if this was a puzzle I could solve if I got the sequence right. Her text came, "There now? Safe. We'll be home by 10. I love you." It rubbed a soothing hand across the part of my brain that had begun to panic like a smoke alarm with bad batteries. I imagined her in their place, a loft version of ours, maybe with softer lamps, a different rug, a plant that survives on the attention of women like Lila. I imagined her laugh, how it tends to bloom at the end of her sentences. I imagined another person noticing the same tiny things about her I notice. How she points her toes when she's content, how she refills your glass before you realize you wanted more. I imagined, plainly, her kissing another mouth. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark until the building's bones made their settling sounds, wood giving a little, pipes complaining, a neighbor moving a chair. It felt like being in an empty theater, all the audience gone, the stagehands yawning, the spotlight still on. When she came home, she had that wind-fresh look, a flushed cheek, eyes too bright. She kissed me, and I tried not to measure the kiss against other kisses. "Are you okay?" she asked, shoes still on, keys still in hand. "I don't know yet," I said. There is honesty that feels like a hand held out and honesty that feels like placing a sharp object between you. This felt like both. "Thank you," she said, and the gratitude landed in me like a complicated gift. Heavy, beautiful, hard to display. We sat at the bottom of the stairs, arms touching. She told me tiny details that had the texture of normalcy. What they ordered, what song came on, the story Lila told about a childhood haircut. None of it mattered. All of it mattered. At 10:30, we went to bed and lay on our sides, smiling in that careful way people do who want to be brave in front of each other. I reached across the inches and ran my hand along her shoulder. She made a sound like a small, relieved animal. Love was there. So was something else, and we didn't have a name for it yet. We tried dates together, the four of us, lunches that felt like walking a 2x4 over a shallow stream. Dev was quick with soft jokes that eased tension. He'd deflate a moment before it noticed it had puffed up. Lila had a way of listening that made you confess things you didn't realize were inside you. I told a story about my grandfather's workshop and the way he'd smack my palm gently if I reached for a blade from the wrong side. "Respect the edge," he'd say. "It doesn't owe you anything." Lila looked at me and said, "Do you always talk about safety in metaphors?" And I laughed too loudly, which is how I laugh when someone tells a truth about me I haven't learned yet. Maya glowed around them. People always glowed around Maya. The world found its best posture in her gaze. But this was different. A kind of quickened attention, a way she kept turning her face to theirs like a plant toward a window. If jealousy was there, and it was, it came with a second feeling I didn't expect: relief. Relief at seeing her seen. Relief that the attention I had been giving her for a decade wasn't the only attention keeping her together. Relief that if a rib of our life cracked, someone else's hands might hold it while we found tape or glue or whatever was needed. It felt shameful to feel that. It also felt like truth. At home, we'd debrief like marathoners after the race, passing water, comparing blisters. We made rules and then amended them, like lawmakers in a very small country. No overnights at first. Then, maybe in a month, but only with a check-in. Tell the other person before you make plans, not after. No secrets, but also no weaponized honesty. If you wouldn't want to know a detail because it would only perform pain without offering clarity, don't ask for it. We tried to state boundaries as offerings rather than punishments. We failed. We tried again. The whiteboard gathered colors. A red rectangle for her Tuesday dinner. A blue stripe for my Thursday basketball league. A green square for the date night we swore to protect like a national park. I made a joke about string maps detectives used to track convoluted cases, and she laughed and kissed my shoulder and said, "We're just being clear." She said it like we were saving ourselves from the vagueness that kills people in different ways. And then Tuesday. A nothing Tuesday, middle child of a week. Rain stopped, the city bright and smug. I came home early from a job site because the contractor had mismeasured the alcove and our custom shelving would have to be reworked, and there is no point arguing with a wall. Maya was in the shower. Her phone, face down on the counter, buzzed and skittered to the edge like a nervous insect. I touched it, turned it over to stop the suicidal inching, and the screen woke up to a message that wasn't lurid or cruel, only tidy and confident. Tell him yet? Love. L. Below it, another screen, an unsent message, the draft so carefully typed it looked like a final. I think I'm in love with you. Not the idea of you. The you of you. I don't want to lose him. Can there be another shape? I didn't hear the shower anymore. I heard the sound the world makes when you realize the conversation you are having with yourself is about to become a conversation you must have out loud. My mouth went dry in the theatrical way movies depict, as if my body had its own sense of drama. I set the phone down as if it were hot. She appeared in the hallway in a towel and the blue sweatshirt, hair dark and wet, flipping drops onto the hardwood. She saw the phone in my hand, saw my face, went pale, then pink, then the kind of white that contains all the colors. I didn't send it, she said, before I had even found how to hold my mouth to make a word. Her voice was small and straight. I was going to talk to you first. About the shape, I said, and turned the phone so she could see it. The phrase sounded like something you say when you are already halfway down a corridor and want to be congratulated for looking back. She went to the table and sat. The fruit bowl was empty. The whiteboard hummed with our week. Her hands shook once, then steadied. I love you, she said. It was not nothing. It was also not everything. I love you, and I think I'm in love with her. I am trying to find a way to hold both truths without breaking either one. She laughed once, a hollow, brave laugh. Maybe this is what it means to be an adult. Maybe this is the dumbest thing I've ever thought. The radiator banged like a hammer. Outside, somewhere, a siren launched and then receded. My mind did that useless trick, pushing me little scenes of us like postcards. Her asleep on my chest on the bus to the coast. Her crying over her father's watch not fitting her wrist. The time we danced in the kitchen to a song that played on a neighbor's radio. Feet sliding on flour. The postcards were not arguments. They were artifacts. They did not make a case. They made a collage. I can't, I heard myself say, before I had practiced the line in my head. I can't be that shape. I thought I could try. I can't. She closed her eyes and nodded as if she had expected me to say it and had wanted me to say something else anyway. Tears came fast, the kind that tickle the nose, the kind that make you a little angry for having a body. I know, she said. I know. She reached for me, then stopped her hand in the air and dropped it. I don't want to lose you. You might, I said, and the quiet that followed felt like we had both stepped out of our bodies and were watching two actors attempt us badly. There is no choreography elegant enough to make what followed anything but clumsy. We slept in separate rooms after a month of trying to share a bed and a grief. We spoke with the clinical politeness of surgeons. We divided the life we'd built the way children divide a sandwich. careful to split the cheese and the lettuce with something approaching fairness, failing because hunger isn't quantifiable. She kept the framed print of the tide pools. I took the blender. She kept the plant that hated me. I took the saucepan that liked omelets. The sofa went to whoever could bear sitting on it, which turned out to be neither of us for long. On moving day, I carried boxes down the stairs and thought about the night we moved in, how she'd sat on the empty floor with a bottle of beer, toes painted the fierce red she wore when she needed luck, and said, "This place has so many corners for us to be happy in." I thought of every corner like a small theater where a play had closed. When the truck door slid down with its brutal finality, she stood on the sidewalk and put her hand to her mouth like she might push the rest of her words back in if she could. "I'm sorry," she said. I nodded. Some sorries are devotions, and some are information. Hers was both. As I pulled away from the curb, I saw them coming up the block. Dev's tall, easy silhouette, Lila in a long wool coat the color of cinnamon. They did not see me behind the glare of the windshield, but they lifted their hands in a wave toward the window, like people who have learned to signal friendliness in case anyone is watching. My ribs ached in a way that felt honest and stupid. The apartment shrank in the rear view, then turned a corner and vanished. The truck rattled like a shopping cart with a bad wheel. In the passenger seat, the envelope with our utility accounts looked indecently official, as if you could put a stamp on the end of a life and send it back to the sender marked undeliverable. Rain began again. I turned on the wipers, and they kept time like a metronome for a song I didn't know yet. The new apartment smelled like drywall and detergent. I slept on a mattress on the floor because the bed frame I ordered took 6 weeks to arrive, and I didn't have the will to complain. The windows rattled when the train passed, the kind of hum you mistake for loneliness until you realize it's just the city breathing. The first night alone, I folded my hands over my chest and stared at the ceiling as if expecting some projection to play, the reel of a marriage in reverse. It didn't come. What came instead were fragments. The sound of her laugh from another room. The smell of oranges when she dried her hair. The way she used to ask, "You okay?" Even when I was. For weeks I kept turning to tell her things, a funny line from a podcast, a broken sidewalk I'd nearly tripped over, only to meet silence. The echo of my own voice became its own companion. I didn't drink. I didn't rage. I didn't tear photos from frames. I just went quiet in the kind of way people do when every sound hurts. Maya and I texted about logistics. The bank account, the insurance, the storage unit key. Each message was clean, neutral, the verbal equivalent of a white wall. She'd end with "Hope you're okay." I'd answer, "You too." I didn't ask about Dev or Lila. I didn't have to. I knew. The absence told its own story, the comfortable silence of people who had found a rhythm that no longer included you. I learned to cook for one. The first time I cracked 2 eggs instead of 4, I stood there with the shell halves in my hand, paralyzed by how much smaller life had suddenly become. The skillet hissed like a secret. Grief is a mechanic, it works in loops. I'd wake fine, run by the river, answer emails, and then something ordinary, a commercial jingle, a perfume in a crowd, would open a trapdoor beneath me. Once, I found one of her scarves balled up inside a coat pocket I'd taken by accident. The fabric smelled faintly of her shampoo, lavender, and something woodsy. I pressed it to my face in the dark and hated myself for needing that smell to sleep. I stopped checking social media, but mutual friends were not kind with silence. Saw Maya and Lila at the jazz bar. One message read, "They look happy." The words were meant to comfort, as if happy were a zero-sum game. Instead, they landed like stones in my gut. I avoided Pine Street for months. The one time I accidentally walked past that loft, late evening, lights on, music humming, I stood across the street and watched shadows move on the walls. Laughter burst from an open window, and I couldn't tell whose it was. I stood there until I was cold and stupid with it, and then I walked home. Some grief turns inward. Mine turned into motion. I started repairing things, the cracked table, the bent lamp, a shelf a neighbor left by the dumpster. My hands wanted to keep making sense of something. I'd grown up around tools. My grandfather had been a carpenter who believed wood was the most honest material because it records everything that happens to it. If you know how to listen, he used to say, wood will tell you where it hurts. Maybe that's what I was doing, listening for where I hurt. I rented a tiny workspace near the old train yard, barely more than a garage. Dusty light poured through tall windows. I bought a used table saw from a retiree in Queens who talked to his tools like old friends. At first, I just made simple things: boxes, shelves, a stool. The sound of the blade through grain was a kind of prayer. Sawdust coated everything, even me. It smelled like renewal. One morning, I was shaping the edge of a walnut plank when a thought came sharp and sudden. She isn't coming back. I froze, plain mid-stroke, and waited for the panic. But what arrived instead was a strange calm. It didn't feel like acceptance. It felt like room, a widening inside me that had been waiting for air. I named the little workshop Quiet Angle after a concept my grandfather taught me. The precise slope where two pieces meet without splintering. You get it wrong, you see the damage immediately. You get it right, the joint holds forever. Months later, I ran into an old friend of ours, Hannah, at a coffee shop. She hesitated before speaking, the way people do when they're not sure if the news they carry will wound you. "I saw Maya," she said finally. I smiled because that's what politeness demanded. "How's she?" "She seems good." "There." "Well, the three of them seem good." Hannah looked away, stirring her coffee longer than necessary. "She mentioned you started something?" "A workshop." I nodded. "Yeah, building furniture." "That's amazing," she said, relief coloring her voice because she could now pivot to the safe topic. "You always liked making things." "I like fixing them better," I said, and she smiled sadly, as if she understood. When I left, the rain had started again. New York rain has a smell like iron and history. I walked for blocks without an umbrella, the kind of self-punishment that masquerades as therapy. The first year alone was all splinters and glue. I worked, I ran, I ate the same dinner 5 nights a week. I learned that grief doesn't disappear. It recedes like the tide, slow, deceptive, leaving behind small wreckage you find months later in your pockets. By winter, Quiet Angle began to attract small commissions. A cafe wanting tables, a couple needing a crib. I learned to price my work, to invoice, to sand until the wood gleamed like water. I liked the math of it. The world had become unpredictable, but would obeyed its rules. It bent when asked gently, split when pushed too far. I thought less of her then. Or maybe I thought of her differently, as a story that had already told itself. One morning, while repairing a cracked tabletop, I caught myself humming. Not the song we used to play, not a memory tune, just a sound of motion. It startled me, that small evidence of living. The spring she moved in with them, I found out through a photo someone tagged. Maya in a sundress I'd bought her, sitting cross-legged between Dev and Lila on a picnic blanket. All three of them barefoot, smiling like they'd solved a problem I never could. I stared at the photo for a long time. Not with anger, with curiosity, maybe even pity. The three of them looked radiant, but also a little too aware of the camera. People who have to prove their happiness always smile a bit too hard. I shut the laptop, went to the shop, finished the chair I was building, ran my hands over the grain until my heartbeat steadied. By the second year, Quiet Angle was less a refuge and more a life. I hired an apprentice, a quiet kid named Sam who loved the smell of varnish and quoted physics facts between sanding rounds. "Did you know what expands perpendicular to the grain, not along it?" he said once. "It's like grief. It grows in the wrong direction." He didn't know how right he was. I began taking custom orders. A designer saw my work online and reached out. Then a local magazine asked for an interview. They photographed me with sawdust in my beard and called me the artisan of healing. I laughed when I saw the headline. Healing isn't art. It's maintenance. You keep showing up, tightening bolts, checking the frame, replacing what gives out. A year later, I was at the river again, jogging as always, when I saw her. Maya. She was leaning on the railing, hair shorter, darker, a red scarf wound tight around her throat. I stopped before I could think better of it. She turned. For a heartbeat, she didn't seem surprised, just sad in a familiar way. "Eli," she said. "Hey," I managed. The silence stretched, filled by gulls and wind. "You look good," she said. "So do you. How are you?" I shrugged. "Building things." "You." She smiled faintly. "Trying to build things too." She didn't say with whom. She didn't have to. We stood like that, two people in the same city but entirely different weather. Then she said, "I'm sorry, you know." "I know," I said. And then, softer, "Me too." We didn't hug, didn't touch, just nodded, awkward and tender. Then I jogged away before the grief could decide it wanted another round. That night, I sanded a tabletop long past midnight. the sound steady as breathing. Outside, the city roared like the ocean in a shell. I thought of her, and of Dev and Lila, and of the way people build and unbuild each other without meaning to. I thought of love, not as expansion or freedom or bravery, but as a craft. One that fails, splinters, gets remade, sometimes stronger, sometimes not. By dawn, I finished the table, ran my hand along the grain, whispered, "You'll hold." And I believed it. The year after that river encounter passed, like a long exhale. The sharp edges of loss dulled into something I could run my hand over without bleeding. I still caught her name sometimes, a passing mention at a party, an email thread from a mutual friend, but it no longer set off alarms in my chest. It was just sound. What I remember most about that year isn't sadness. It's the quiet. The kind that sits beside you rather than inside you. I woke early every day before the city noise began. The light through my apartment blinds came in stripes, soft gold across the concrete floor. I brewed coffee, black and hot, and walked to the shop with my travel mug steaming in my hand, watching my breath rise into the cold morning like proof I still existed. In the beginning, quiet angle had been an escape. Now it was devotion. There's something holy about shaping a thing that didn't exist before you touched it. Every board held a small rebellion against the chaos of the world. You learn to read grain like you read faces, where it bends, where it resists, where it's fragile beneath its polish. I made chairs that could outlive arguments, tables that held family dinners, cradles that waited for children whose names weren't yet chosen. Each piece left the shop with a tag that said made by hand, held by time. It was cheesy, but people liked it. I think they could feel the sincerity in it, that each plank had been handled by someone who had learned how to lose and still keep faith in touch. Business grew slowly, then all at once. A local designer named Irene stopped by one afternoon, tall, stylish, the sort of person who saw potential where others saw sawdust. "You have an aesthetic," she said, walking the shop floor, her heels clicking over concrete. "Organic honesty. This could sell." I laughed. "It's just wood." "It's never just wood," she said. "It's story." She offered to photograph my pieces for her magazine clients. Her first spread landed in Modern Homes Quarterly. They called my tables functional poetry. Orders followed. Then interviews. Then a short documentary shot in the shop, my voice narrating over the sound of the planer. I think love and woodworking are the same. You learn when to press and when to ease off. You can't force something that wants to bend. When it aired, an old friend texted me, "You sound healed." I wasn't healed. I was working on it, like sanding a surface that always has one more rough spot if you look close enough. Success is a strange kind of silence. You spend so long fighting to be okay, and when you finally are, it feels suspicious, like the calm before another loss. There were nights I'd stand alone in the workshop after everyone had left, light pooling in the sawdust haze, and think, you did it. You built a life that doesn't ache. And then another voice, smaller but truer, would whisper, "But who do you share it with?" Cora arrived the following winter. She was a client at first, wanted a bookshelf for her classroom, she said, something wide enough for literature and narrow enough for teenagers' attention spans. She taught English at the local high school, lived in a small walk-up filled with books and thrift store art. When she came to the shop, she wore a red coat and a smile that felt like an honest mistake. "It smells wonderful in here," she said, breathing in the cedar air, like the inside of a memory. I laughed. "Depends on the memory." She ran her fingers along a table leg. "Mine's my grandfather's study. He smoked a pipe and read The Old Man and the Sea until it fell apart. We talked for an hour about stories, Hemingway, Baldwin, the kind of characters who get broken and keep going." She had the rare gift of listening without the need to fill silence. She'd tilt her head slightly, like she was giving you space to find the truer sentence beneath the one you'd just said. When she left, I stood staring at the door long after it closed. Her bookshelf order turned into a coffee table, then a sideboard, then, somehow, dinners. The first time I saw her apartment, it was raining again. The bookshelves I'd built stood against a wall painted moss green. She had placed plants on every shelf, as if to remind the wood it was still part of the living world. We ate pasta at her tiny table, knees brushing. She asked about my work. I asked about her students. "Teenagers," she said, pouring wine, all wanting to be infinite and terrified of it at the same time. I smiled. "That never changes." She looked at me a long moment. then said, "You talk like someone who's been somewhere difficult and decided to come back." I didn't answer, but something inside me, the part that had been standing guard for years, shifted a little closer to warmth. When I left, she pressed a small packet of seeds into my hand. "Basil," she said, "for your window. It's stubborn. It grows even in bad soil." That night, I planted them in a chipped mug and placed it by the kitchen window. I watered it too much at first, then not enough. Still, it sprouted. Our closeness unfolded slowly, carefully. Cora was patient in a way I didn't know people could be. She never pried into the story of Maya. She let it arrive when it was ready, like a letter without a return address. When I finally told her, one rain-soaked evening, over tea and Miles Davis, she listened without pity. When I finished, she said, "You did what people do when they love. You tried to stretch beyond your limits. That's not failure. That's faith." Something in me broke open at her words. Not painfully, more like a sealed window cracking to let in air. We began to spend weekends together. Long walks by the river, Sunday markets, movie nights that turned into shared silences, the good kind. She wasn't like Maya, and that was the mercy. Maya had been a constellation of brilliance and restlessness. Cora was the steady orbit that kept things from spinning off. There were no whiteboards, no rules. Just the gentle rhythm of two people learning how to inhabit the same quiet. By the second spring of knowing her, I realized I hadn't thought about that circle, in months. The pain that once felt like a phantom limb was now just memory, present, but powerless. One morning, I came to the shop early and found Cora there, leaning on a finished dining table, tracing the curve of its edge. She looked up and smiled. "I love how you sign them," she said, pointing to the burned-in logo, "Quiet angle, yay." "It's a habit now," I said. "I guess I like knowing something of me stays behind." She nodded thoughtfully, then said, "Do you ever build for yourself?" The question hung in the sawdust air. I realized I hadn't. Not really. Everything I'd made had been for others, to sell, to prove, to heal. That night, I started sketching plans for a table. Just one. Ours. We married 2 years later in the arboretum where Maya and I once had our vows. Not because I wanted to rewrite history, but because I wanted to honor that it existed. It was a small ceremony, under the same canopy of oaks. The air smelled of lilac and varnish from the benches I'd refinished myself. When Cora walked toward me in her blue dress, simple, unadorned, the kind of beauty that doesn't need announcement, I felt something inside me still and then unfold. Her vows were simple. "I don't need to be your first home, Eli. I just want to be your last." When she said it, something in the crowd sighed, and I realized I'd never been happier to be known completely. After the wedding, we bought a small house near the park, sunlit rooms, wooden floors that creaked in greeting. The living room smelled of lemon oil and tea. On weekends, we read on opposite ends of the couch, feet touching like punctuation marks between paragraphs. The basil from her old seeds grew wild in the kitchen window. She would sometimes find me sanding late at night, music low. She'd lean in the doorway and on. "Got an email." She read it, eyes softening, then passed it back. "Do you want to reply?" "I think I do," I said. She smiled and touched my cheek. "Then reply. No jealousy, no suspicion, just trust, the kind that doesn't announce itself but fills a room anyway." That night, after Cora fell asleep, I sat at my desk and wrote, "Hi Maya, thank you for the message. I accept your apology, truly. I think we both learned what we had to, though the cost was high. I'm married now. Her name's Cora. She's good and kind. The kind of quiet I once mistook for dullness but have come to understand is the deepest peace there is. I wish you calm waters and good light. Eli." I didn't hit send until morning. It was late October when she wrote back. "Thank you, Eli," her message said. "You have no idea what it means to hear that. I'd like to see you, if that's ever okay. No pressure. Just a conversation between two people who once shared a home and still share a history." It was signed simply, M. I sat with it for a while, rereading. The house was silent except for the tick of the kitchen clock and the faraway hum of a streetlight outside. When I told Cora, she looked up from her book and said, "Would it help you to see her?" "I think so," I said. "Then do it." She smiled. "I trust you." There was no performance in her voice, just warmth, the kind that makes you remember what being safe feels like. We met 2 weeks later at a cafe downtown. I got there early out of habit. I still don't know if I was nervous or just respectful of the ghost between us. The place was small and plant-heavy, sunlight slanting through wide windows. The barista knew my name. That kind of familiarity always steadies me. When Maya walked in, I didn't recognize her right away. Her hair was shorter, her frame thinner, the kind of thin that comes from trying hard at life. But when she smiled, that same warmth came through. Not the wild, searching kind from years ago, but a quiet one, like an apology that had learned to sit still. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I echoed. We hugged, brief and careful, and it was like shaking hands with the past. The conversation started with logistics, how work was going, what the city was like, polite details about mutual friends. Then, inevitably, the silence opened, the kind that invites truth. "I read about quiet angle," she said. "Your work's beautiful, Eli. I always knew you'd make something with your hands." "Thanks," I said. "It saved me, honestly." Her eyes glistened. "I thought about writing sooner," she said, "but I was ashamed. After everything, I didn't know how to be sorry out loud." I nodded, tracing a ring of condensation on my coffee cup. "I think we both did the best we could with who we were then." She exhaled, a long, trembling breath. "You were good to me," she said. "Better than I knew how to handle." When Dev and I fell apart, I kept thinking about that. How kindness can be a mirror, sometimes too bright to look into. I looked up, met her eyes. "You love the world in every direction," I said. "I was scared to let you." Her mouth wavered into a small smile. "And now I understand that love isn't about permission," I said. "It's about endurance. About showing up when the light changes." She blinked, and tears gathered but didn't fall. "You sound like someone who found peace." "I did," I said. "And it's quiet. It's nothing like I imagined." We both laughed softly, the way you do when humor and grief overlap in the same space. She told me about her last few years, how Dev and Lila's relationship unraveled under the same freedom they'd once worshipped. "We wanted to be infinite," she said. "But infinity doesn't make room for the ordinary. And the ordinary is where the love was." I listened without judgment. I realized, sitting there, that I no longer needed to be right about anything. It was enough to understand. "I'm glad you're okay," I said finally. "Truly." Maya reached across the table, touched my hand lightly. "You made it, Eli," she said. "You really made it." I smiled. "So did you. You just took the scenic route." We both laughed again, softly, and it felt like the last page of a story closing itself. When we stood to leave, she hugged me longer this time. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not hating me." "I never did," I said. "I just had to learn how to love you differently, from far away." She nodded, and I watched her walk out into the cold sunlight, the wind catching her hair for just a moment before the crowd swallowed her. That night, I told Cora everything. We sat on the couch, lights dim, our dog asleep at her feet. I told her about the coffee, about Maya's voice trembling, about how it felt to finally breathe without ghosts sitting on my lungs. She looked human, I said. Smaller somehow. Not in a bad way. Just real. Cora listened, then smiled. "You sound lighter." "I am," I said. "It's like carrying a box for years, thinking it's full of bricks, and opening it to find it was empty all along." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Maybe it wasn't empty," she said. "Maybe it was holding the space you needed to fill." I kissed the top of her head. "You always find the right metaphor." She laughed softly. "Occupational hazard. English teacher." Winter came, the slow kind that turns breath into fog. The shop grew busier. I trained new apprentices, taught them how to respect the grain, how to pause before cutting. On weekends, Cora and I cooked soups that took all day and read books aloud by the fire. Sometimes I catch myself thinking of Maya, not in longing, but in gratitude. We had burned bright and fast, and that brightness had shown me the edges of myself. Without her, I might never have built the patience. When I told Cora that once, she smiled and said, "That's what old love should do. Teach you how to do the next one better." She was right. Years later, on an ordinary Sunday, Quiet Angle celebrated its 5th anniversary. We hosted an open house, clients, friends, students, all wandering the shop floor under strings of amber lights. Laughter filled the air. Someone played guitar in the corner. Cora stood beside me, her hand in mine, and I realized how different the world felt now. Not louder or brighter, but fuller. The kind of fullness that doesn't ask to be noticed. At the end of the night, after the last guest left, I turned off the lights one by one. The machines hummed quietly as they cooled. The air smelled of oak and varnish. Cora walked up behind me, wrapped her arms around my waist. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That this is what peace sounds like," I said. She smiled against my shoulder. "And what does it sound like?" I looked around the shop, at the tables, the shelves, the pieces that would outlast us both. Like sawdust settling. Sometimes, when I'm sanding late into the night, I think of that cafe and the way Maya's eyes softened when we said goodbye. I wonder where she is now, if she's happy, if she found her own quiet angle somewhere. But I don't linger there. I finish the piece, wipe the surface clean, and lock up. At home, the lights are low. Cora's curled on the couch with a book, glasses sliding down her nose. The dog lifts its head when I come in. The basil in the window leans toward the moon. I hang my jacket, wash my hands, and sit beside her. She looks up and smiles without a word. I take her hand, run my thumb over her wedding band, and think. You don't lose people. You learn the shape they leave behind. Outside, the city breathes. Inside, the house settles, warm and alive. And for the first time in years, the quiet doesn't need explaining.